Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining another amazing Authority Labs webinar. Our topic today is a really interesting one. It's pretty in-depth. We're going to be talking about the difference between business-to-business SEO and business-to-consumer SEO. There is definitely a difference to be discussed, but there's also a lot of similarities. And to help lead the discussion, I have some amazing panelists with me today. Steve, John, and Bill. Steve, he is the CEO of Wiideman Consulting. John leads global advertising and marketing teams at projectmanager.com. And Bill is the CEO of Hartzer Consulting. Thank you guys so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us,
Great.
Ashley.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So to get started, let's get to know you guys a little bit more. Steve, do you mind kicking us off and kind of giving us a little bit background about how you got started into the industry and what you're currently working on?
Sure. Yeah, I've been in search for feels like 2 decades now, and got my corporate background working for Disney Parks and Resorts Online, and was the SEM account manager. And I had a passion for search, so I was able to convince the leadership team to let me dabble a bit in SEO. Today, we have a small agency in La Mirada. We support franchises and multi-location brands and a few B2B businesses. And I'm also teaching a night class at Cal State Fullerton.
So to say you're busy is an understatement then.
You got to keep busy. That's who we are. As SEOs, it's in our lifeblood. If we're not busy, we go nuts. So
Exactly. Free time is actually a bad thing.
it's true.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Steve. John, can you kind of give us a little bit of a background about how you got started as well and what you're currently working on?
Sure. So I am the VP of Marketing at projectmanager.com. We're a SaaS company located in Austin, Texas. We also have an office in Auckland, New Zealand. We're a global company providing project management software. So it's primarily B2B offering. But I got my start in search about 10 years ago, starting mostly with local businesses, doctors, lawyers, dentists, those kinds of clients. And then I worked with an agency called Geek Heart Studios, built that agency up from 3 employees to 25. And at that point, I was running the agency as COO. So I've had my hands in client work, kind of in-house work, B2B, B2C, every part of search imaginable. So
a little bit of everything then.
Yep.
Yeah, which
you miss the agency world? I don't.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, John.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Bill, you've definitely been in the industry for a while. I'm not sure if as long as Steve, but how did you get into the industry? Why search and what are you doing now?
Sure, I actually started around 1996 creating sites and creating affiliate websites, hand coding and doing starting some webmaster duties in the 90s. Worked in-house at a telecom, an international telecom company, and then also around 2004 moved to the agency world. And then 2015, 2016 ran an agency for a while and then moved out on my own, primarily focusing on technical SEO audits of sites, and as well as about maybe 20% of my work is also doing expert witness work in the legal space.
Oh wow, awesome. Okay, well, perfect. So let's dive into this. Let's figure out exactly what the differences are. I'm pretty sure when it comes to B2B and B2C marketing in general, not just SEO but marketing, we can probably all agree that it's pretty different. And when we're thinking about marketing those 2 different industries, that some of the tactics that we would use would be different. But Bill, when you're thinking about generalized marketing for B2B or B2C, can you think of any, or do any big things come to mind of some main differentiating factors between the 2 different types?
I think overall I think the biggest discussion really is around the biggest difference is around traffic. I think traditionally B2C sites just get more traffic and page views and so forth, and a lot of B2B sites may only get in the hundreds versus the thousands of visitors every day that a B2C site may get. But that doesn't really mean that the traffic is not valuable. And even though they get only 150 visitors a day to a B2B site, that could actually be a lot of leads worth potentially millions of dollars for certain B2B companies. So that's kind of the main difference that I see on the high level, is that you have a difference between just the levels of traffic. And sometimes people get confused about, okay, well, it doesn't have, this B2B site doesn't have a lot of traffic. That doesn't necessarily mean actually that that there's not a lot of value there.
That makes sense. And John, since you've touched on so many different aspects of SEO and marketing in general, do you kind of see the same thing that Bill's talking about in terms of traffic being a big differentiating factor between the two, or have you seen other factors between the two that really make a difference?
Sure. Yeah, I think that can definitely be true. In our case, we are primarily B2B. And we are getting about 1 million sessions per month now. And that has been through really, really aggressive content marketing. But in terms of the primary differences, the biggest one I probably see is trying to identify who is the decision maker. So in most B2C cases, the person doing the searching knows exactly what they're looking for, and they're going to be the one who pulls the trigger and makes the purchase. In terms of B2B, we don't always know who the decision maker is. We don't know if the person who's on our website or signing up for our free trial is the one who has the credit card in their pocket. That's like a literal thing that happens in our office. People walk around going, "Who has the credit card?" But we have to identify different areas of the funnel to find who is that decision maker and provide content for all of those different people. Rather than just the one person doing the search for the consumer stuff.
It's so interesting that you touched on content, because crafting content for B2B versus B2C is a totally different step. It's a totally different message. Steve, with your work with Disney, I mean, that's pretty B2C right there. Did you see that the content that you were creating was a lot different than some of your B2B clients?
Oh, it's 100% different. I mean, you've got, as John mentioned, it's a different person behind the computer. A consumer will go online, maybe do a little bit of research, price compare, go back to Amazon, right, and then just make a purchase. But the person who's behind the B2B experience is somebody who's going to print out and download and put a folder together in some cases, or a binder, or a PowerPoint presentation, and then give it to their boss and say, here are the different options that I found, and here's the different pricing. And then they have to go through the demos, depending on the cost of the product, or the platform that they're paying for. So it's a much longer journey with a lot more hands and eyes that have to see it. Where on the B2C side, in many cases, you can just cross out a price, put a lower one, and see a hike in conversion. You can't really do that on B2B. It's not buy, it's not order now. It's learn more. It's try for free. It's get our white paper, and then it's the whole cycle of what happens after. It's the remarketing. It's the attribution of all the different touch points those users have, and staying in front of them. This time, instead of showing them an ad for your product, you're showing them a video of a client testimonial, and then the next time they see a piece of content, it's a video of some of the awards and reasons that you'd want to purchase. So it's really understanding all of those different stops along the way before that B2B person actually makes a purchase. So yeah, I think the content tells the story, but it's absolutely a completely different audience.
Yeah, and different content techniques all the way. That makes sense. Kevin Indig, which shout out to Kevin if he's watching, he said in an article that optimizing Airbnb.com and Marriott.com are two different things, which I thought was really interesting, because essentially they're overnight stays. If I'm traveling for work and need a place to go, I will literally look at those two sites and compare and see, is there a great Airbnb option, or should I just do the hotel option? He goes on, he wrote a whole article about this and explained how they're two totally different business models, and so you have to optimize them for that because they're different. I originally didn't see them as different business models because I saw them as overnight stays, but then it kind of made sense on the different attributes that it gets. John, would you agree that a company that's as similar as they both offer overnight stays, but different overnight stays, would need different optimization techniques?
Yeah, I would agree with that. The first thing that kind of comes to mind in terms of differences in that specific example would be Marriott, the hotel chain, will have a whole layer of Google My Business optimization that can be done that can't be done for Airbnb. Airbnb is entirely kind of existing on their own site. People can't put their house on Google My Business and have a map listing. So the optimization is a whole lot different. I think Marriott has a bigger opportunity to do GMB and local SEO tied to that GMB stuff. But Airbnb probably has kind of the bigger budgets to do other creative content marketing revolving around their own website and their own listings. So that would be kind of the primary difference that I would see in that space.
It's funny that you mentioned Airbnb and creative marketing because they've been coming out with some really creative campaigns lately and trying to differentiate themselves from that hotel marketplace.
Yep.
Keep in mind though, also, certain brands actually might have two different sections of their site. They might actually be, I could see, Marriott having or a big brand having or another hotel chain looking specifically towards events and to attract, conferences, for example, to come to their site. So that, more of a B2B situation where there are, they're for promoting their event space at a hotel versus actually just that one particular, consumer experience where, it's direct to consumer. There's, even Disney may have a corporate type of section of their site. And so they're actually it's not only just the whole set, the whole site, whether it is very specific B2B or B2C, but in one part of the site, there might be a B2B focus versus, and also on the same site, a B2C, focus. So there can actually be two different marketing plans, if you will, and two different strategies for actually different sections of the site. Sometimes, it would be a subdomain, sometimes it would not, but it would be certain pages on the site or certain, that area. So, we're not just talking I've done large audits of sites that had that situation, and so it was kind of tricky to balance, okay, is this B2B traffic on this site, or is this B2C traffic, and managing that part can be tricky.
Yeah, with the restaurant franchises, we have the same issue. We've got the main content that's focused on getting people to order online, and then we've got the franchise section of become a franchisee and non-traditional franchising and all sorts of different types of content that we want to build some site structure around, so that when people are thinking about a franchise or putting some a breakfast restaurant in their mall or whatever, that that we've got content that can address that. So yeah, it's a good point.
I think there's
But how would
also
you distinguish? Are you focusing on different keywords, or are you focusing on different demographics? Or are you actually thinking about, okay, this is a franchise section and we're going to have a certain marketing plan for to hit the franchisees, or versus how do you manage that difference?
That's the fun part of being an SEO, right? Is you get to learn so much. So when we got that opportunity, when they said, hey, we need some help with a different section of our site, and we completely forgot you guys were there for us. What do we do? And we're like, gee, that's a great question. So we did some kind of basic queries. We used some of the language that they use, like non-traditional franchising and so forth. We found the content that appears for those types of queries, and we took the top 30 to 50 of them and kind of reverse engineered what keywords those sites were getting traffic from. sat down with the business and went through the list and said, is this you? Is this you? Is this you? And then when we were done, we came up with a list of search terms that we thought were important. We organized them based on search volume and topic, and we start to build some site structure. But it all kind of comes from learning from third-party insights and some of the historical data they had around the limited amount of content they already had. So we started there, and then again we used, I think we used like SEMrush to look at what search terms were driving traffic to competitors, and then we just aggregated it, organized it, and came up with a game plan.
Do you focus on like search intent, where and try and figure out if they're and look at a keyword list and say, okay, this is obviously a B2B query, but also this could be B2C? I mean, that's some area.
Yeah, that particular one was easy because most people looking for a restaurant aren't looking for a franchise. Right? So,
Sure.
So that made it a little bit easier. Like, I guess the keyword might be something like breakfast restaurant. A little bit of an echo. So breakfast restaurant, somebody who's on the B2B side will look at it and say, oh, these are all just restaurants. I'll need to modify my search for something like franchise or traditional investment or something like that. Are you guys getting an echo too, or is it just me?
Yeah, a little bit of an echo.
Sounds a little echoey.
Yeah.
Oh, weird.
Perhaps it'll bug out. It might have just been a little Wi-Fi thing. But John, did you have a comment that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump back and tie back to the original example of Marriott versus Airbnb. I'm not entirely convinced that they're even competing for the same keywords and people all the time, right? If my family's coming to visit in November for Thanksgiving and they emailed me and said, hey, we're going to find an Airbnb near your house, they didn't even look for hotels. Sure, the hotels could bid on Airbnb keywords and Airbnb could bid on hotel keywords, but generally people know which one they're looking for. And in that case, brands like Marriott or Airbnb are trying to get in front of people in other ways to try to build them up as a loyal customer so that they don't have to try to capture them at the point of search. They already have the customers in their kind of loyalty database, and you're going to use Airbnb when you go visit a new city because you've always done that.
Yeah, so the search intent is, from the user perspective, is completely different.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Yeah, I think many SEOs would probably assume that Airbnb and Marriott are just bidding on people searching for hotels in Austin or places to stay in Austin, but there's a whole nother arm of kind of marketing that can be done to get those people before they even have that search intent.
Yeah, the Google Ads side of my brain is saying site links, and the site links would be completely different. Airbnb would be around value and around stay somewhere new or stay, just completely different audience, where the Marriott would be more around luxury and convenience, and you trust them and it's consistent, and something that's stable and reliable, and you don't have to worry about the owner changing their mind or there being an accident. So I think one is really around value, and one is a little bit more around I don't know what's the word used, loyalty. I think loyalty might give you some sense of trust too, that you trust that this hotel's going to take care of you and there's not going to be any issues.
Mm-hmm.
That would make sense. So clearly the search intent is completely different for brands like that, which can be argued they're both B2B and B2C in a way. In terms of goals, for business goals, do you see that SEO goals for a B2B campaign could actually produce different results than a B2C campaign? Are clients from B2C coming to you with very specific goals that are totally different than B2B? Or would you say, John, that most of these goals are the same? People want traffic, people want better rankings.
To me, I think everything always needs to be tied back to revenue. So no matter what you're reporting or how you're reporting it, actually tying it to the result, which is revenue or business growth or money in the bank. I don't like getting into the weeds with keyword reporting and link building reports and all that kind of stuff, because at the end of the day, SEOs are hired to make the client more money. So that's what I like to report on. That's the goals I like to set up, and everything else kind of beneath that is just kind of a cascading KPI.
Yeah, we
The only
use
issue that I
reporting
see that I've run
Verifone.
into over and over again is in B2B situations where you have a form fill and then that sales cycle is sometimes days or weeks or months. And so tying back that sale or that amount of sale back to the actual search and saying, okay, well, they did a search initially for this keyword and then that became a $10 million sale. That's the difficult part of it, and that's the difficult part of because there's a form fill and a more drawn out long sales process, and there can be they can talk to several people during the process, and it's difficult actually to tie that back. B2C, it's a little easier because there's typically maybe an online transaction would be a goal. There's a cart involved and so forth, and you can see actually them getting to the receipt page where they bought something versus okay, it's a form fill and it's taken a couple of months to get this this client through to fill out an RFP and get through the whole process.
Yeah, I think you really nailed it there. Attribution modeling is something that keeps me up at night, and we actually have a data scientist on our team just to handle all of those problems. It's that important to our business to understand what spend is going out and where the revenue is coming in. So I think that's really good point, is that B2C definitely has less of those problems.
And touch points are going to be free demo. They're going to be, attending an event or a webinar. It's going to be downloading a white paper. It's not even still a thing. I don't see white papers as much anymore. But it's going to be something that's a very soft conversion that we'll measure against. And if we know that soft conversion has an X% hard conversion rate, by doing better attribution, then we can use that first touch point, as a goal, as a KPI if we want to. For B2C, though, I agree. It's usually, hopefully, it's a very quick transaction, or it's one that happens within 30 days if it's a $300 to $1,000 purchase. There are some interesting things that you can do when you think about like buyer psychology. I know on the B2C side, we were able to do some things that would inject in a timer into a page. If it was say it's a $5,000 Rolex watch, and the person's been on the page for 4 seconds, we can put a little timer that comes in and says, hey, by the way, if you buy this in the next 20 minutes, since you seem like you're interested in it, we'll shave $500 off the cost. And in that one day, we saw like 3 times more conversions, just by having that sense of urgency. Can't really have a sense of urgency with B2B. It doesn't really play well.
So clearly the goals, one, you're looking at a longer sales funnel, the second, a much shorter sales funnel. But Steve, in terms of the difficult aspects, which one's easier, whatnot, when, say, you get a new client and they're B2C or B2B, which one do you get right away and you're like, okay, this is going to be an easier campaign to go through versus the other? Or does that really exist? Is it essentially really similar steps in the beginning of a new campaign?
I think the strategy for any search campaign is always going to have the same structure. There's going to be the technical part. There's going to be the content and keyword research and coming up with a taxonomy plan. There's going to be some research in where the industry gets their links, a little intersecting link research. There's going to be, in some cases, some local, like John mentioned earlier, with maps and understanding citations and review ratios and things like that. So I think from that point of view, the structure, the infrastructure is the same, but the steps will be different. I think for B2B, there's a lot more of kind of understanding what the competitive nature of the industry is. So I wouldn't say B2C is always easier, because we had a client that did dental health equipment, and they didn't have much competition. They had like 6 major competitors. That was it. So it wasn't really difficult. There's not a lot of volume. You just have to make sure that you've addressed all of the the user intentions, and and aren't as hard on your call to action as you would be on B2C. And on the same hand, we've had some B2C clients that were extremely complicated because they sold, really expensive products that most people wouldn't buy online. So it made it difficult to, to get that final transaction. So I think it's
So one of the issues that I've run across several times with B2B clients is that, there is form fills and just, the leads, and they will typically initially tell me that there are certain, times when they just get a lot of leads that are just not even worth their time. And so one of the initial exercises is to actually really try and focus and see if we can identify which keywords are leading to the lower quality leads that they're continually getting, and then and focus in more on, okay, these are the keywords that are really actually converting well and become a really good lead. There's some kind of, if it's an example would be a B2B, a site that provides website security and so forth, and where they provide basically their, in a B2B situation, their products and services are, thousands and thousands of dollars, where, if there are certain keywords that they rank for, they'll bring in leads, but, it's actually consumer. And so, and who couldn't even afford, to spend, $10,000 on website security, so that is one of the exercises that I constantly find that I'm going, especially with new B2B clients and auditing their sites, looking at their sites and traffic, and determining, okay, which keywords are specifically the ones that are bringing in the poor quality leads. And that can be a challenge to identify. How have you guys dealt with that in the past and figured that out?
John, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Like I said, we have a data scientist on staff who's basically dedicated entirely to making sure our business metrics are up to speed, so that we can quickly identify where those high quality customers are, and which ones we should just leave alone and kind of let the marketing automation take over. So we
Sure.
dedicate a lot of resources to that kind of segmentation. But it's certainly not easy. It's a lot of data, looking at data points, trying to correlate behaviors and demographics and all kinds of stuff to certain outcomes, which is never an easy thing to do.
I think this is one of those great opportunities to be able to marry your paid and organic. I think in paid, you can actually see the queries that are resulting in what ultimately becomes a customer, and you really can't see that on the keyword side because of not provided. And you can try to marry a little bit of the Search Console data to your landing pages and draw some correlations. But I think at the end of the day, this is probably one of those opportunities where you really want to leverage your paid search query data, is the catalyst to driving what your SEO keywords are going to be.
And I did want to jump back to Steve's example of the selling like a Rolex watch. The main difference to me when starting out a B2B or B2C campaign is identifying the needs of the customer, the consumer. In the case of a Rolex watch, people aren't going to be searching, I need a solution to make sure I can show up to my meetings on time, or I need a way to stay on track during the day. They're just going to search for a Rolex or a watch. So that search intent is kind of laser focused or specific. But in terms of something kind of B2B, like, our example is project management software, there are people doing all kinds of different searches where they need our platform. So they might search, how to keep employees engaged, or how to keep budgets on track for projects. And that's kind of how-to informational searches, but the need is that they are looking for a tool or a solution to improve their business. So I think B2B, you have more of those opportunities, and it takes some creative work to find them. But B2C is usually a little more drilled in terms of how people are looking for what they're looking for.
I could see that overlap, John, with B2C a little bit, where people would be searching for a to-do list online or task management or something, where they're looking for something to organize their own lists, and they get to the site like, I wonder if this would be good. So I could see where there could be a small percentage of people who would perform a query where your site might come up.
Yeah, I think we have both kind of intensive searches. We really span our content all the way across the funnel so that we hit every type of search. We have the kind of high intent, people looking specifically for a software. We have the how-to kind of informational content, and then we have everything in between: ebooks, white papers, template downloads, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, people love free stuff, whether it's B2C or B2B. Anytime you can give away free checklists and
Absolutely,
anything, they love that. Great.
Yeah, people go crazy for free T-shirts too.
Yeah,
and
awesome.
Socks are really good freebie as well. We actually have a question from the audience, which anyone and everyone who's watching, there's a little question box on the bottom right. Feel free to type in your questions. We will have Q&A at the end as well, but if you have questions as we're going through, by all means, go ahead and ask them. We have a question from David, which Bill, Steve, John, either one of you, please feel free to jump in and answer on this one. The question is, what are some SEO strategies that are fundamentally opposites in B2B versus B2C? Can you think of any strategies that are just, they contradict each other for the two different industry types, or?
UX is completely different. The user experience, when you get to a landing page, is going to be completely different, right? We know that Google said that they rank based on content and links, and then recently they're finally opening up a little bit about some of their user behavior signals. So everyone's done enough tests to know that user behavior is super important. If the user clicks your listing more so than other listings, and they stay on your web page more so than other listings, then there's a higher probability that they're going to draw an inference that page was the most important. So if from a UX standpoint, you've done enough testing and experimenting to know that your content addresses the user intent better than the other pages that appear in search results, then you're on the right track. So I think the UX is fundamentally different, that you're not thinking with sense of urgency, scarcity, reciprocity, all of those sort of B2C sales tactics. Instead, you're using the B2B of knowledge and education and understanding and an example and proof and social proof, right? So you kind of need a completely different experience, I think. So strategically, if I was talking about SEO, I'd be talking about the user behavior signal, and the strategy would be around user experience. And the way that I might address it is to run some experiences that don't require immediate form fill outs. Instead, you can have kind of the A/B. Are you this? Are you this? Are you looking for this or that? I think Ion Interactive used to have a product called Liveball. I don't know if it's around still, but it was really interesting to watch as you test 50 different experiences and asking Boolean questions. And then you finally get that user to that last question, where if they want the end results, they've got to give you their information, but at least it carries on a virtual conversation with the user that they won't want to repeat on some other website. So I think those kinds of experiences, might be part of the strategy. Is what are those experience tests going to be? How many of them are we going to run, and how long do we want to run it?
That makes sense, and thank you so much for David for asking that question. Bill, in terms of B2B versus B2C, do you see one type of company get penalized more when you go through and say you have a new client and they've come to you and they're dealing with a lot of penalties, or do you see it just across the board? Is it generally the same between the two?
It's generally the same. I mean, it's B2C. I tend to see a little bit more links and link profiles can be a lot different than a link profile, for example, for a B2B site. It certainly can be, as an SEO strategy, it certainly can be sometimes a little bit easier for a B2B, to get some links, and sometimes it can be, just more, more difficult. I think that there's, in some cases there's, because of the content that a B2B is putting out, that in the form of, it could be research or, pulling data from internal data, or something that, you've worked with your data scientist to pull all sorts of information. Then you have case studies and research and so forth that, can actually be in B2B, they tend to spend a lot more time creating the content, and the writers might tend to be more technical, and so you can get, it might be easier, if you will, to get in B2B, to get links and so forth, because of that, because of the quality of the content. Certainly B2C, you certainly can put out quality content, but it's different, just a totally different type of thing. The other part is that B2B, that they actually tend to have more, quality links in and mentions just right off the bat, because they are a B2B company. You tend to get, it's easier for them in certain cases, to have a Wikipedia page and to have, be a part of the knowledge graph, and entity SEO is a little bit easier to focus on with a B2B company, and but that's where I think that we're going with the future with the knowledge graph and and entities. And from just an SEO standpoint, the trust and authority of a B2B site is a little bit easier to get as an SEO than, and they may already have that trust and authority, versus a B2B site that that especially local business, selling something online, it may be a little bit more difficult to get, certainly like a Wikipedia page and be a part of the knowledge graph and so forth, and get that trust and authority.
I definitely agree with that. I may be generalizing my thinking about this, but I generally think of B2C having more small companies involved in that. And when you have smaller companies, you have smaller SEO companies, these guys who are charging $200 a month, and they're doing really nasty work. So I would say I've probably seen more malicious or bad SEO done on smaller websites and smaller companies, which would generally fall under the B2C. But that doesn't mean it's not happening on B2B websites, larger B2B companies. But like Bill said, a company of our size, we're not even doing any real outreach for our content, but it's still generating links, just because we have that built-in authority. When we publish content, it gets picked up and it gets ranking and it gets shared. So we don't have to risk anything to get our content out there, which is really convenient. But most smaller companies are not afforded that luxury.
True.
They'll tend to have PR firms, for example. They'll have a PR firm on staff. They'll have a PR firm and an SEO firm, and so the challenge is to actually get the PR firm to think more in terms of SEO, and not just sure, we want to get the media attention, but when they write a press release, we want to get certain links to certain internal links on the press releases when they're put out, and certain certain keywords mentioned, not just if we can get certain words in the title in the title of the press release. I mean, there's still some things that the traditional PR people writing and doing PR, they don't really think about SEO. And so that's one of the challenges, which is a lot different than on the consumer side.
Yeah, we get to look at every press release that goes out as a best practice, and sometimes they don't give you very much time. It's like, this is going to go out tomorrow morning. Any changes? Well, yeah, let's try to incorporate these search terms in there, and let's make sure we're deep linking to the actual promo page, not the home page. And but having that 90-minute training session with the PR folks right out the gate makes life a lot easier. And then you just develop a process, and you agree to an SLA.
And when all teams can actually communicate together, then it generally works out great.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, we're going to be opening up the floor to Q&A shortly. So if you have any questions, please go to that little question box and submit your questions. I have one more question myself, and it's specifically for linking. In terms of getting backlinks, is it easier, would you say, for B2C or B2B to get backlinks, John?
I think generally speaking, there's going to be a lot of the same strategies that go into backlink generation. I'd probably tie it back to like company size and domain authority. If your website already has a lot of traffic and ranking, you know, there's less outreach needed, less aggressive outreach. So I'm not sure it's as much tied to the B2B to B2C difference than it is to, like, you know, maybe what stage of the life cycle a business is in, from startup to, like, you know, acquisition or a large company.
For B2B, there's, you know, typically something I start to look at initially is what kind of partners and what kind of, you know, partnerships that they have. In many cases, they do have technology partners or, you know, or something, you know, like that. They, you know, and they may have a, you know, they may be a Microsoft partner, or they might be, you know, depending on the B2B. And so there are some opportunities to, you know, they may be listed as a Microsoft partner, but they're not listed in the Microsoft directory, or, you know, those types of things that just are, you know, that we can point out. And certainly it's kind of, it's not, it's something where we have to actually ask one of, you know, the B2B company's employees or who has that relationship to try and get the link or something like that. And it's not something where, you know, as an SEO, I can, you know, who's separately, I can just call my, you know, try and request that link. I mean, sometimes there's, you know, partnerships, and the same thing with, you know, when franchises are involved and so forth. And so that, you know, that may be, you know, a little bit more easier in certain cases. But I think in B2B, there's one of the things that a lot of sites fail to see that right now is a great opportunity, is just doing proper internal linking. I mean, for every, you know, rather than just doing, you know, so if you think of, I think about, when I think about it, okay, one link from an external site, you need to get, you know, 3 or 4 internal links with that anchor text. So there's a lot of opportunities, from, you know, editing PDFs to, and putting links in to, you know, just, you know, and you know, editing press releases that are on the site currently, and you know, blog posts, and, you know, webinar transcripts. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities to do a lot of internal linking, and that can actually be, you know, in an hour, I can sit down and add 30 or 40 internal links on a B2B site, which will, and within days will have a major impact on rankings.
True. Yeah, I know that when we look at, you know, a link strategy overall, we always start with what we already have. You know, running a deep crawl or a write or an on crawl or whatever you happen to be using is a great starting point to really look at how your internal linking structure is set up, and are you using breadcrumb navigation, and do you have a good site structure that really kind of pushes more of the value toward the parent pages that are a little bit more competitive. So I think internal linking is a great place to start. Other things we look at, I mentioned earlier, is the intersecting link report. You know, where do all the other brands get their links, and how can we build relationships, you know, with the places that do that? Unlinked mentions, right? That's another really easy one. If you have somebody on the PR outreach team who can do a little bit of outreach and say, hey, thanks for mentioning us. By the way, it doesn't look like users who read this page can click and visit our site from where you mentioned us, you know, without actually asking for a link. I think that's, you know, another approach. But like you mentioned earlier, I think John mentioned that there's a smaller audience of people that are out there. So even if you are creating amazing content, there's fewer people who are searching for it. So it does get a little bit more difficult on the B2B side to get people to link to you. Or on on B2C, I can say how to tell if your Rolex is fake or real. Come up with a video and an amazing landing page for it, and drive tons of links because people will reference it like crazy. But on B2B, when you're solving problems, which is what everybody should be doing with content marketing and solving problems, it's much more challenging because the audience, the people who would link to you, is much smaller.
That makes sense. Thank you guys so much for your response. We have time for one question from Amy. Amy's asking, does implementing AMP make more sense for B2B or B2C companies? Does anyone have any AMP opinions?
I have strong AMP opinions.
Oh, everyone does.
Everybody does, right? Who wants to go first?
You go ahead, Bill.
I don't think, it actually, it's as far as AMP goes, I think it's kind of rare right now that I'm recommending that a site use AMP, only because, I find it more geared towards sites that really just want page views, and more sites that are more news sites, and I find it appropriate for news websites, and that where they just want to drive page views. And so the typical, sure, there may be, if your business model is around page views and traffic, and that then AMP can be good, and because you're selling ad space. But in fact, if you have a good, well optimized, really fast loading site, and I'd rather Google send the traffic to the to your server and than cache it. When I've done audits, I've run into a lot of AMP cache issues where if it could be a company who is selling a product that has pricing on that page. One of the issues is that it actually is pretty difficult to get that page updated in the AMP cache. You can't just, it doesn't just clear out. And technically, you actually have to do a call from your server to the AMP cache URL to actually force Google to recache that AMP URL. If you take the page down, I mean that AMP cache is still out there somewhere. So there's technical issues why, especially if you have pricing that may change on products, that there may be you run into issues with AMP cache. There's a little bit more, too much that I can go into right now, but that's my opinion. Is that it's pretty rare that I'm recommending, especially for like a B2B site, to actually use AMP. I'd rather the traffic go to that site directly.
John, do you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. The short answer for me is that if I'm not a news site, I'm not touching AMP, I'm not dealing with AMP, I'm not implementing it. The bigger kind of picture is that I think AMP in general is a solution to a problem that's kind of a band-aid fix. Google released AMP as a way to increase speeds for mobile users, but I kind of look at that as the equivalent of like your car runs out of gas, so you go buy a new car rather than fixing your car or getting gas in your car. I'd rather spend resources on optimizing my site speed and working with what we have than bringing on all those extra resources just to use AMP technology that consumers still don't even understand.
Yeah, I've had a few conversations with Pierre Farr, and his opinion is the same. It's if you can't get your website to load quickly on mobile, AMP is a good quick fix to make that happen. And I've seen it win and lose in both ways. You see SEOs all over Facebook saying, "Hey, I just removed AMP and my conversion rates went up, my rankings went up," and all sorts of back and forth. My experience with it is, if you can, like Bill said, if you can optimize your page really well, and it performs better than what it does on either way, on AMP or not on AMP, you go with the one that's going to perform the best. So testing is to me, every brand who can't optimize their own website to be faster can implement AMP to as a kind of a backup plan. But the reason that it fails most of the time is because they don't take the time to actually optimize the AMP page for the user. They just say, hey, I just did an AMP version, and they threw it up there. But then you look at it aesthetically, it's off and things are quirky and it's not working, and say, oh, well, AMP didn't work for us, turn it off. And and unfortunately, I don't want to blame all the web developers, but it's the web developer really should be working closely with the usability folks, because AMP can do really well. I think eBay still has over 2 million pages out there on AMP, and they seem to be doing pretty darn good. So it really, it depends on what kind of resources you have, how hard it is to optimize your site to load fast on mobile as is, and testing.
Yeah, I was going to mention that same thing, resources. I think that's the key here is, if I had unlimited budgets, I'd probably spend more time thinking about things like AMP. But just to get something like that launched, up and running, maintain it, have the expertise, understand it, follow the changes in the industry for what's happening in AMP, that alone could keep one person busy within the organization. And to me, that's just not worth it at this point.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Well, that wraps us up for today. Steve, Bill, John, thank you so much for all of your insights. This was extremely helpful for me, and I'm sure it was for all of the attendees involved. I highly recommend everybody go follow Steve, John, and Bill on Twitter. It's a great way to reach out to them, and they're always tweeting great facts. If you'd like to sign up for Authority Labs or go through a demo, you can always go to authoritylabs.com to learn more. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Thank you to such amazing panelists. Round of applause to each of you guys.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Until next time.